Amazing. Hi, everyone. Thanks for that amazing video giving us an overview of your practice, Kai. I thought we would just introduce ourselves for the audience and then we'll kick off.
Yeah.
So
first, just a little disclaimer, we have automatic captions on. However, this is new software and obviously it's not very diverse. So my name, Yasmeen, does not come out correctly.
We've got Yasmeen,
we've had it so far. And Kai's name doesn't work either.
Well, it's better than nothing, we feel. So I'm Eleanor. I'm your activities officer for this academic year, and I use she or they pronouns.
And I am Yasmeen. I am the campaigns officer for this year, and I use she, her pronouns.
And we are joined today by Kai. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Amazing.
Hi, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone for having me here today. And I want to acknowledge the support of Shape Arts as well. And so my name is Kai. Does it even appear? Sorry, I'm just really fascinated by AI, how racist they are, or how diverse they are not. But yeah, so thank you for having me here. Last week I gave a talk at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience. And whenever I mentioned neurodiversity, it came out as Neil diversity, Neil. Let's have a look. It did pick it up. It did pick it up. Very impressive. But it also did register new diversity, and Neil is of course the name of a man, so that's not very diverse at all. But just want to say thank you for having me here, and I'm very delighted to be able to talk about neurodiversity to everyone here today.
Thanks so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kai. I also wanted to give a really, really quick shout out before we start to our Disabled Student Society Diva. Mindy, the president, is here today. I just want to make sure that you guys know that we have a community of disabled students at UAL. So cool. Let's get started.
Yeah, and a huge thank you to Shape Arts as well for working with us. And thank you to you guys. Let's go. First question.
So our first question for Kai is, what first inspired you to create works around your experience as a neurodiverse person?
Yeah, so the video that we just saw was of a work that I did about 2 or 3 years ago. And that was a work called Magic Carpet. It's quite well documented. You can see it all over the internet. But what motivated me to make that work was because I was given the diagnosis of ADHD, dyslexia and dyspraxia. And as someone who's always been given a lot of labels, I mean, I have a lot of labels that are kind of thrown at me. I've never been one to accept them at face value. I've always been like, okay, I'm going to have to unpack that. And the way I unpack things, the way I think through things or work through things is through art. And it was the same with that. And I know people when they have a diagnosis, it kind of makes everything fall into place. But for me, I didn't just want to let that happen because I've been an artist, a practicing artist all my life. I've been around for a while, and I've been a pretty fully formed, well, half formed, somewhat formed person. And I just thought, okay, it does answer some questions, but I'm going to take it on. I'm going to unpack that a little bit more. So long story short, I applied for some grants and had some funding from Unlimited Arts, and also had funding from King's College London. There was a scheme called King's Artists. So different things fall into place, which allowed me to leave a job and to leave a permanent job and to work on the project. In terms of approaching Philip, who is the person you saw in the film, that already happened before I had those funding in place. So I just pretty much knocked on his door, and I just said, "Well, I'm an artist. I want to learn about ADHD. That's part of my process of unpacking." And I didn't want to just look it up on the internet. I didn't just want to read books and so on, because I'm also dyslexic. I don't like to read. But I thought I'm ready to actually talk to someone who might be on the other side of seeing things, who see my brain as a disordered one, for example. Or that was how I started. But as you can see from the video as well, the process was such a revelation. I learned about how people in the brain and mind sciences think about brains. I also think about how Philip Escherson, who is an authority on ADHD, adult ADHD, thinks about ADHD. And so everything was so much more nuanced. And that was through that process of being an artist in residence, attending classes at King's, attending classes that were attended by neuroscientists and so on, that allowed me to learn that. And that whole thing I framed as my artistic process of inquiry. So that was my artwork. So it wasn't just about making those artistic outcomes, which included carpets, tapestry, and so on, and badges and so on. But that whole process, of challenging my own thinking, challenging other people's thinking, learning about other people's thinking, and then creating spaces for conversations. That whole process was my process of inquiry through art. So that was the inspiration.
Thank you so much for that explanation. I really love the kind of phrase of like art form person. I feel like everyone on this call is kind of like an artist working it out, and it's so great to see that kind of like discovery in your work. It's really playful and really lovely. I was doing a little bit of research actually the week before when I was writing the questions for this, and I came across part of your work, or there was kind of an interview where it was mentioned the social model of disability. And I was just wondering, I don't know how many of our students are aware of what that is. So are you able to give us a quick explanation of how you see the social model of disability and how and if that informs part of your work?
Sure. So the social model of disability, I think in a simple way to look at it, or a simplistic even way of looking at it, is to think about it as not seeing disability as a person's in terms of a person's impairments, but to look at the social environment, that look at the social conditions that the person is situated within, and to understand the sort of forces that are at play. So you are disabled because the provisions aren't there for you. So it is not your fault. It is not your problem, sort of thing. A lot of people might pitch it as the opposite of the medical model of disability, which would help people to understand it in a way, in that some people understand a popular understanding. You might define the medical model of disability as looking at the impairments and looking as the different makeups in the brain and the minds as a kind of a disorder. And the word disorder was used. The word abnormality is also used without quotes, that's used in psychiatry. In fact, some might say that that's psychiatry. That's the whole kind of premise of psychiatry. And there are lots of there's a lot of critique of that as well. But so some people might pitch the medical model of disability as the opposite of the social model of disability, which would kind of allow you to understand, okay, so one looks at how it is your problem. You are disordered, your brain is disordered, you are impaired. The other one looks at how, no, it's not you, it is the environment that isn't constructed for you. So, however, I think there's also quite a lot of nuances within that. There's a lot of, this is a spectrum, it isn't so binary. And this is also what I've learned through getting out of my comfort zone and actually saying, yeah, I want to talk to those guys. I don't want just to make my assumptions at this side. I actually because I've been fully formed or pretty formed, I just thought, yeah, I'm ready to take this on. I want to take on this conversation. I'm ready to talk to Philip. I think I can handle him. And that was kind of part of that. Yeah. So does that give some kind of an explanation of what the social model of disability is, but also I was also trying to bring in some layers to that, but does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's given us quite a good understanding of like where this sits in like kind of disability theory and disability art. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of power in the journey that you've taken to kind of stand this, and just wanted to ask, what was it like collaborating with sort of scientists and that element, and is that something that you'd recommend for students to do?
Absolutely. Yeah, I really enjoyed the process, and for me, I was very much ready to do that. I've always been someone, so I started off pretty much as a traditional classical classical artist, I suppose. I went to an art school. I went to the Slade, did 2 degrees there, did my first degree there, and also did my PhD there. So that's as art school as it gets. But I've always so I've had quite a long career. I'm very lucky. And by the way, it's because of scholarships, not because I grew up feeling entitled and feeling like, yeah, I can just go to art schools and so on. I was fortunate to get scholarships, and I want to address something about elitism later on. But so I got scholarships and I was able to go to art schools. So I had quite a kind of a fairly traditional sort of starting journey in the start. For the first 10 years, I was doing museums, galleries, art biennales, film festivals, and so on. So that was all great fun. And then in the last 10 years, I sort of felt, I need to get out of my comfort zone. As much as I was enjoying the art world, I felt I needed more. I needed something else. I needed to challenge myself. And this is what I often do. I often like to kind of pull myself out of what I thought might be spaces where I get too comfortable. And so what did I do? I signed up to do a PhD. And that I really struggled with that, because I didn't know I was dyslexic the whole time. I've never really known that the struggles were part of the learning differences and so on. So working with scientists was very much something that I felt I was ready to do at the later part of my career. And but I thought that actually what's interesting about that is that it was because I have had this training, as an artist, because I have had these skills as an artist, that I am able to do that. So I very much see that as part of me being an artist. I very much see that as an outcome and as part of the process of my artistic inquiry. I don't see that as separate. I don't see that as, oh, I'm not in the art world. This is the art world for me. This is the art world. The process of proactively approaching members of other species to talk to them using art, through art. So that for me is very much part of, so talking to Philip was very much part of that process.
Yeah, thank you. That's amazing. It's really nice to kind of see these two very segregated subjects and sides kind of come through with your work. Can you tell us a bit more about your art and how it sits as a form of research?
Yeah. So for me, the different ways I describe my work, and one of the ways is to talk about the artistic process as a process of inquiry. So this is about asking questions. And And I think that's what good art does. It's about asking questions, not trying to come up with answers. And it's about opening up spaces, new spaces for new questions. So for me, research is so there's a lot of discussion about what research is and how art is part of research. And the nice thing is that that is quite a live conversation. There are people who like to contextualize art as resembling a kind of a scientific inquiry. Like there has to be a question, and then there has to be a kind of an investigative process, and you have to come up with some kind of a finding or some kind of a discovery of some sort. But I think there are also a lot of other approaches. So there are a lot of there's a live discussion going on. So if you look up different terminologies like practice as research, PAR. If you look out terms like practice-led research, if you look up practice-based research, so there are quite a lot of variations, and I think UAL would also have its own variations in terms of PhD level. But for me, it is about asking questions. It is about creating new spaces to ask questions and to use art to open up new insights, and to also use art to combine things together. And that is when you combine things together that haven't been combined before in that way, that is also a process of creating new knowledge. So I think there are different approaches, and I like doing that, and I have been very much doing that. What I did for my PhD at the Slade was to look at running, and to look at running not as an athlete. I'm not an athlete, I'm a bloody artist. So what I did was I was looking at how walking is such a deeply, it's such a canon, it's a cultural canon, and it's a cultural canon because we know about, say, what's his name? Oh gosh. The Daffodils guy, Wordsworth. Yeah. Wordsworth? Wandering lonely as a cloud. So there's a huge cultural canon, cultural tradition of people, artists, writers, philosophers using walking, and to use that as creative, in creative ways to as part of their artwork. So Wordsworth was talking about walking. Walter Benjamin, he has written about walking, and the reef, not the reef. He was talking about the sort of the flaneur, strolling around in the streets, strolling around on the streets. The situation is international. In the 1950s, with French artists, French intellectuals, French scholars, who were saying that, oh, they want to take ownership of the streets, and they were using walking, they were using drifting. So it was a very subjective approach to the city, for example. So walking is quite a nicely established tradition in the arts. And I was just thinking, okay, that's great, but it's quite male. It's quite ableist. It's also very privileged. I mean, one of the kind of archetypal images of the walker is someone with a top hat, nicely dressed, and walking a tortoise. So that you can do if you have time and if you're a person of leisure. And so I just thought, okay, that's interesting. What about running? And what about running? Because running ups the speed, and running is popular. Running has critical mass. It is popular. There are people doing marathons, or even if you don't do marathons, you can run after the bus. When you're a kid, you are running around, and so on. So I thought, oh, what about running? So so that was what I did for my PhD. And it was a process of inquiry. It was a research area. It opened up a new research area in that it wasn't something that had a kind of that was systematically studied within the arts. And I just thought, okay, I want to bring that in to have a conversation with the cultural tradition of walking. So we were talking about Richard Long, for instance, the land artists, for instance, going on walks and making temporary installations. And I was thinking, okay, what about running? How does running kind of have a conversation with that? So for me, research is very much about asking questions. And also, along that process, you are taking things on, taking people on, taking existing ideas on, and saying, yep, I recognize this, I can relate to this, or no, that doesn't quite talk to me, that's too ableist, that is too male, that is too privileged. So through my running work, I've been able to, and I've been fortunate enough to work with a really diverse group of people, homeless women, for example. I learned about the work of homeless women in London who use running and in as a way to talk to other women and so on. So research for me is about taking existing ideas on, situating yourself, but also making enough differentiation to say, yep, this is what I think this is what I think could be interesting also.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. It's really nice to hear how sort of these elements organically sort of marry through your work, and how this is something that all of us as artists are naturally doing without even realizing, and kind of it makes science, which is quite a difficult area to access, it makes it more accessible, knowing that we are making those critical evaluations ourselves naturally, without consciously being aware of it. So that's really, really lovely. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I think it was really interesting the way that you talk about your PhD, because when I think of like a PhD, I think of like a white man studying classics, writing a theory. But like when you talk about running, and when you're talking about like engaging with like, especially like homeless women, that engaging with a community, the way that you frame you in your work is around, there's like such fluidity about that. And I think that's really exciting, especially for students who might be considering doing a master's, doing a PhD. It's making that process accessible, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing, this is quite a nice moment. I mean, the art PhD, I'm happy to talk about this more, but I just wanted to point out that the art PhD is still not something that's set, which is maybe quite a good thing. I think most art schools are allowing spaces for students to kind of define the way they see research for themselves. So there's quite a good range of PhDs out there. So, and I think there is currently quite a lot of room for people to kind of negotiate them the way you want it to. And I would invite people to take that up as an opportunity. I know some people might struggle and say, no, I actually would like to have a clearer idea of what it is and what it isn't. But I think the fact that something is not fully formed always presents a great opportunity.
Definitely.
That's like, yeah, that you've hit the nail on the head. Like, that's really exciting, and I hope that students feel like they can do that. We have 3 more questions. We'll see if we get through them, but also I really want to make sure we get questions from students. So if you're a student watching, we've got Q&A functions. Just think about anything you want to ask. My next question is kind of around like socially engaged practice. So if your PhD work and you're running, you're out in the community, you're like, when I think of socially engaged practice, I always think kind of about performance work. Maybe that's not actually so true, but would you see your practice as socially engaged? And what impact has your work had, not only on the disabled community, but on the world around you?
That's a good question. Yeah, all your questions are pretty good. So well done. That's a good question, because I've never really thought of my work as being socially engaged until quite recently, because I'm one of the most antisocial people on earth, which sounds ironic. People might be surprised to hear that, because yeah, a lot of my work is about working with people. And when I think about it, it completely makes sense for me to talk about my work through the socially engaged practice lens as well. And it makes sense because I teach, I curate, I make art, I do my own weird stuff. I also do a lot of pro bono work. I am very active as a volunteer. I sit on boards. I'm part of, for instance, I'm a trustee of a charity called Music in Detention, which is about using music and with and for people who are detained, migrants who are detained. The UK has a hostile immigration policy, in case we don't know about that. But so one way I can kind of explain it, not that I need to, but one way to explain it is that, yeah, this is all socially engaged practice because I'm working with people. And in socially engaged practice, the process is what matters. It's not the kind of discrete artistic outcomes. You're not making a film. You're not necessarily even making documentations of what you're doing. I don't need to prove what I'm doing. I do a lot of mentoring with young women. I always will make time for that. And then I will always have zero time for actual socializing because I hate socializing. Is immensely stressful. And I just thought to bring that out because that's something very, very neurodivergent as well. A lot of people who are neurodivergent fundamentally, not to generalize, of course I'm generalizing, but a lot of people who are neurodivergent struggle with the social aspect. When I was young, I've always thought myself as a misanthrope, like I dislike people. But if you look at what I'm doing, I'm so promiscuous. I am a slut. I'm a social slut. I work with everybody. I've worked with psychiatrists. I've worked with urban planners. I work with everybody, and I want to work with everybody. I want to deliberately work with people I may not interact with. So yes, the socially engaged practice question, to that I'll answer yes. I do see my work as socially engaged practice, even though it is also very much in conflict with my personality as someone who is very antisocial.
Yeah, I think sometimes, I mean, I kind of share that, where it's like you become sociable because you have to, because there's so many gaps in sort of the world, and you want to help to make everyone else's experience so much easier than your own was, that you kind of force yourself to be social for the sake of other people.
Yeah, but also when I'm doing it through work, it is not force, it is easy, and I want to do it. And that again is, if you want to analyze that, it could be my way of processing the world through art, and through when I frame that as work, I can do it. It completely makes sense. When it is, I can't go. I dislike shopping. I can't go to a crowded shop, for example. That would drive me nuts. But in another context, it completely makes sense.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't see that as helping other people. I see that as part of what an artist can do, and in this case, I want to do this because this is about working with people, opening up questions, opening up spaces, doing things with people, and for me that is my art.
Yeah. So within that, kind of our next question is touching on how sort of inaccessible not like the art world can be, and I'm sure a lot of students throughout their time at university and outside of it have struggled with accessibility. As someone who's kind of been through that process, do you have any tips on how to sort of make your access arrangements known, and how to sort of raise that with institutions?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Not everyone is in a position to be outspoken about what their needs are. For those who are happy to do that, it is their job to speak up, not on other people's behalf, but to speak up as much as possible to help to raise the visibility and to help to make space, create a creative, discursive space for people to talk about this. And so there are different, if you feel that you aren't able to speak up for yourself, so you should try to speak up if you're able to. If you are not able to, could you find allies? Could you find other people like yourself? And there are other people who would be happy to not speak up on your behalf, but they have a voice, or they have a platform, and they might be happy to use that. And the thing about neurodiversity is that it is invisible. So a lot of people do not speak up about it. And there's a lot of, I've talked quite extensively elsewhere about how women and girls are pretty good at camouflaging, passing, and scientists have published papers around that as well. And a lot of the studies are around autistic women, how autism is underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed, and also ADHD underdiagnosed and misdiagnosed in women and girls because we don't present in the same way as men or boys. And that speaks to the whole, and another topic that we won't get into today, which is about the sort of how sexist a lot of fields of knowledges are, and they do not pay attention to women, to issues around race, and so on and so forth. So that's another area of discussion. But a lot of people do not talk about what their needs are because they don't feel that they are able to. And a lot of women would camouflage or pass or compensate and use their own time to pick up on what they need to do. I've been doing it all my life without knowing that, which is also why my diagnosis was very, very recent. But if you're able to do speak up, it's good that neurodiversity is something that's increasingly discussed. So a lot of colleagues in the arts, in disability arts, have been sharing resources. So one example is the Access Rider, something known as Access Rider. If you Google that and you Google disability arts online, there's a document by an artist. She shared that, and that's quite valuable and interesting. I also mentioned how you might be interested. One other thing that you could do is to be I was going to say hooked up. I do say hooked up, but not in a sexual way. But you can get hooked up, or you can get connected with other people like yourself. So I've set up a network. It's called the Neurodiversity and/or in Creative Research Network. So I came up with the and/or in, and I really regretted that, but I can't change that now. But it's called the Neurodiversity and/or in Creative Research Network. And there are now 210 of us in the network. And a lot of people there are very similar to us in that they are neurodivergent, or they work in academia, they're in higher education as researchers, as creative researchers, or as professional staff members working in higher education. So there's a huge range of people. There are also loads of people who aren't in higher education because they couldn't get through, they couldn't get in. And so there are quite a few people there, and that's a critical mass. When it's a critical mass, your voice can be amplified. And we're going to write an open letter addressed to higher education, to the sector, and also to research funding bodies to help to raise awareness to neurodiversity. So if you find that sort of getting together with other people like yourself useful, do get together with other people, and there are quite a few different groups up there.
That sounds brilliant. I'm sure we can send over the links and details.
Yeah.
But also access rider.
Yes. So
yeah, access Alexan, I can't spell her name. I'll find it and then I'll share that.
Amazing. And Mindy just put in chat that the Diva Society is actually going to be doing an access rider workshop. So
excellent. There you go.
That's going to be amazing. But also we'll try and send
excellent
at the end to all the links to your work. I am conscious of time that we don't have very much longer. We've had a question. You kind of covered it, but I think I should read it out anyway because it makes quite a good point. It says, did you find as someone who identifies as a woman that it was harder to be diagnosed with ADHD and subsequently harder to be accepted within the art community as a neurodivergent artist, particularly by your male counterparts?
Yes, that's a good question. The dominant narrative is of the autistic, high-functioning, white, privileged male. Rain Man helped to kind of create that narrative. And in popular media, that's also quite a common narrative. So you have Mark Zuckerberg, or you have Chris Packham, and that's his name, right? He's someone on TV. And in the neurodiversity world, if that sort of phrase can be said, or in disability arts, I think that also tends to be the sort of people on the top of the food chain, the sort of male, high functioning, so-called high functioning, which is a really problematic term, male. So, and I mentioned earlier about how women and girls often get misdiagnosed because you don't present in the same way as the male kind of classic autistic person or ADHD person, and so on and so forth. So part of what I was doing with my work that I shared earlier on, Magic Carpet, was to try to just widen the conversation. It's not to take the shine away from those people on top of the food chain. Maybe it is to do that, is to kind of undermine that. But it's also to say, hey, look, this is anything that's homogeneous is boring. Anything that's stale is boring. And I do want to raise this point. In the arts, we like to believe that we're really liberal, that we're really enlightened. We're not. It's some of the most racist or the most ableist sectors around. And because we think that we are so liberal, that's the danger. That it's so the sort of racism and the sort of aggressions manifest in really, really insidious ways. And that's even more dangerous. So, so to answer the question, yes, it is difficult, but the more the more there is a diversity of voices, the more there is a diversity of work, the more there is a diversity of people who are happy to step forward, the greater. And that is political. So for me, by even being present in my work is political. It shouldn't be. it shouldn't be, but it is political just because there's a dearth of other faces. But it is political also because I come from a country, I have grown up in a country where learning differences isn't acknowledged. It's very binary, it's very black and white. So for me, it is so important to acknowledge the fact that there are biases within so-called liberal communities, and within neurodiversity there are loads of barriers, there are loads of kind of forces at play as well, and it gets quite political as well. So for me, it is always dangerous if there is only one kind of anything. And the nice thing about neurodiversity as a concept, when Judy Singer first came up with it, Judy Singer is an Australian sociologist. She came up with the definition in the 90s. And she's since talked about the definition as well, and kind of added layers to it. And one way that I really like in terms of how she's defined it is that it is a subset of biodiversity. It is important. If you care about biodiversity in the planet and of society, then neurodiversity is also important. It is a recognition of the fact that there are different intelligences, a recognition of the fact that there are different brains and different beings and different behaviors, different ways of learning, different ways of communication. And for me, that makes a lot of sense. In some neurodiversity circles, neurodivergent circles, membership can be really guarded. Oh, you're not neurodivergent unless you have a diagnosis. Oh, you're not neurodivergent unless you have a pure diagnosis, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of politics, which I think is really, really toxic. So this is not necessarily a popular view, and but I think it's important to raise it, which is why the network that I've set up, membership is open to everyone. There are loads of allies, there are loads of people who aren't neurodivergent, and there are loads of people who aren't out because they don't want to be out or they can't be out. And there are loads of people who are happily out. And the analogy with being queer is quite prominent because of the fact that it might not be necessarily physical or visible. So membership in the network is open, and we have people who have had stroke, for instance, and they identify as neurodivergent. And that is widening what neurodiversity is, because it is not just about autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and so on, neurodevelopmental conditions, but you are talking about you're talking about different kinds of brains and beings and minds. And I very much welcome that. And I think for me, as an artist, as a person, that is really important. And that is the true meaning of diversity.
I think that's really powerful, especially because like diagnosis can be hard to obtain sometimes. So having that network open for people who are interested or think they might be or are, like it's a more valuable community than it's kind of like guarding it with the medical model of disability, which I think is really, I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, and definitely with how difficult it is for like women to get diagnosed, it's just really nice to have those spaces open to them.
I'm really aware that you need to go to another meeting, Kai, and I don't want to keep you. So I think we're going to have to bring this to a close, unfortunately. But it's been so lovely talking to you, and I'm sure students found it really, really helpful. Is there anything that you would like to plug or advertise, or definitely bring this to a close?
Yeah.
Your final closing statements, if you will.
My final big words. No, thanks for having me, and I'm really glad that we are opening up the conversation. And I think it's an ongoing conversation. And I'm happy to come back to have a talk to everyone. And if you are keen to sign up to the network, we are writing this letter, as I mentioned, and it's an open letter. And we want to make use of the fact that there is now a critical mass. And we want to ride on the fact that, so with COVID, so with austerity measures in the last 10 years, there are loads of excuses not to do things, right? There are loads of excuses to not care about diversity, to not care about disability, and so on and so forth. And then with COVID, you have even more excuses, especially when everyone's resources are so tight, like no one has time, no one has money, and higher education is really struggling as a sector. But I think I've been very much encouraged by Black Lives Matter, how the Black Lives Matter movement has actually forced the sector, forced higher education to actually say, yeah, actually we have a problem, because we have been claiming to be post-racial, post whatever. And again, this myth of being so liberal, but actually so liberal that you're burying your head in the sand for such a long time. And I think it's really great that Black Lives Matter has forced institutions to open up and to say, look, we need to deal with it. We need to talk about it, apart from only saying, oh, we stand in solidarity with blah, blah, blah. So enough of that posturing, do something about it. So we are encouraged by that. And a lot of my work is also around that. But I think the network is set up by myself and Dr. Ranjita Ditto. She's another woman of color, and she is a social scientist, and she is a lecturer in pharmacy. So we are cross-disciplinary already. And because we are women of color, intersectionality is going to be is in the middle of this. This is not, by the way, let's talk about race and neurodiversity. By the way, let's talk about class and neurodiversity and so on. All these are part of the conversation. So I've come from a very deeply working class background. Both my parents left school by 16 with 0 qualifications because they were pretty neurodivergent. It's hereditary. So we want to make use of the momentum, the fact that now people are having to pay attention, institutions are having to pay attention to do something about neurodiversity. And I'm not just talking about goodwill of individuals. It's not just about, oh, we have a nice teacher here who understands something, or we have a nice ally here. I am interested in structural changes. And if we band up together, this is something we can do together.
Thank you so much, Kai. Those are some strong words, and I think it has given us all some really, really useful insight. And we totally agree with you at the Students' Union. We're trying to do a lot of that structural change. But thank you so much for sharing that with us. And we'd like to say a really big thank you from Arts SU for joining us today. Because this has been amazing, and I hope that we're able to bring you back sometime, because
let's keep talking.
Yeah, you've got so much to share, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.